The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the tree-lined streets of Oakwood Heights, a neighborhood where property values soared and residents expected a certain level of peace. Officer James Thornton drummed his fingers against the steering wheel of his patrol car, his mood as dark as the thunderclouds gathering on the horizon. 3 domestic dispute calls, a shoplifter who'd given him the slip, and paperwork that seemed to multiply every time he turned his back. This day couldn't end soon enough. His radio crackled with static, but dispatch had nothing new for him. Good. Maybe he could finish his shift without another incident. He took a swig of lukewarm coffee from his travel mug, grimacing at the bitter taste. That's when he spotted it, a silver sedan rolling through a stop sign at the intersection ahead. Not racing through, just the kind of California stop that most drivers were guilty of when they thought no one was watching. On another day, he might have let it slide. Today it felt like an invitation. Thornton flipped on his lights and pulled out behind the vehicle. The sedan immediately signaled and pulled over to the curb, at least the driver knew that much. Inside the car, Marissa Johnson exhaled slowly, glancing in her rearview mirror at the police cruiser. Her day had been long enough without this. She'd spent the morning in court, delivering closing arguments in a case that had consumed the last 3 months of her life. Her normally immaculate suit jacket was draped on the passenger seat, and she'd kicked off her heels the moment she'd left the courthouse parking lot. Victory should have felt sweeter, but all she wanted now was a hot shower and her couch. She rolled down her window as the officer approached, already reaching for her license and registration in the glove compartment. "License and registration," Thornton said, not bothering with pleasantries. His face was set in hard lines, eyes hidden behind mirrored sunglasses despite the fading light. "Of course, officer," Marissa replied, handing over the documents. "Was I speeding?" "You ran that stop sign back there." His tone suggested this was a capital offense rather than a minor traffic violation. "I'm sorry about that. I thought I stopped completely." Her voice remained level, professional, the same voice she used in the courtroom when facing hostile witnesses. Officer Thornton studied her license, then looked back at her face as if the photo might belong to someone else. "This your current address, Ms. Johnson?" "Yes, sir. You don't look like you're from around here." The comment hung in the air between them. Marissa felt a familiar tightness in her chest, the same feeling she'd had countless times before when someone decided she didn't belong somewhere. "I've lived in this county for 12 years, officer," she said carefully. "My home is about 3 miles from here." Thornton's mouth twitched. "Step out of the vehicle, please." "Excuse me?" Marissa blinked in surprise. "For rolling through a stop sign?" "Step out of the vehicle, ma'am." His hand moved to rest on his belt, not quite touching his weapon but making its presence known. "Officer, I'd like to understand why I need to exit my vehicle for a routine traffic stop." Her attorney's mind was already cataloging details, his badge number, the time, his exact words. "I smell something suspicious coming from this car. Step out now." His voice had taken on an edge that hadn't been there before. Marissa knew there was nothing to smell. She didn't drink, didn't smoke, and her car had just been detailed 2 days ago. But she also knew that arguing with a police officer on the side of the road rarely ended well, especially for someone who looked like her. She unbuckled her seatbelt and opened the door slowly, her bare feet touching the pavement. "Officer, I'm not wearing shoes." "May I put them on?" "Hands where I can see them. Step away from the vehicle." Standing on the asphalt in her stockinged feet, Marissa felt incredibly vulnerable. Cars drove by, slowing to rubberneck at the scene. She was suddenly, painfully aware of how this looked. Her, a black woman, being ordered around by a white officer in a wealthy neighborhood where residents probably assumed she was the help, not a homeowner. "Officer Thornton," she said, reading his nameplate. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding. I'm a state prosecutor. I work with your department regularly." His expression didn't change. "Turn around and place your hands on the vehicle." "This is unnecessary. I'd like to speak to your supervisor." "You can speak to whoever you want down at the station. Right now you're going to put your hands on the vehicle, or you're going to be charged with resisting." A chill ran through her that had nothing to do with the cooling evening air. This was escalating far beyond what it should have. "Officer, I'm going to reach for my phone to call your precinct. I know Captain Rivera personally. We worked together on the West Side trafficking case last year." It was the wrong thing to say. Thornton stepped forward, grabbing her arm and spinning her around in one quick motion. "That's it. Hands behind your back." "You're making a serious mistake," Marissa said, her professional calm beginning to crack. "I'm not resisting, but this is completely unwarranted." The cold metal of handcuffs bit into her wrists. She could feel eyes on her from passing cars and nearby houses. 12 years building a reputation in this community, and now she was being handcuffed on the side of the road like a common criminal. The humiliation burned almost as much as her anger. "You have the right to remain silent," Thornton began, reciting the Miranda rights in a monotone that suggested he'd said these words 1,000 times before. Perhaps he had. But how many of those times had been situations like this? Minor infractions blown out of proportion, escalated by his own actions. "I know my rights, Officer Thornton," she said quietly. "I also know that you're violating department protocol right now. There was no probable cause for this arrest." He tightened the cuffs in response. "Keep talking, counselor. Add threatening an officer to your charges. Informing you of the law isn't a threat." Despite her situation, Marissa's mind was clear. She was documenting everything, every word, every action, storing it away with the precision that had made her one of the most feared prosecutors in the county. Thornton opened the back door of his patrol car. "Watch your head." The indignity of being folded into the back seat of a police cruiser, hands cuffed behind her back, was something Marissa had never experienced before. She'd put countless people in this position, but always with evidence, with cause. Never like this. Through the partition, she could see Thornton speaking into his radio, probably calling in the arrest. She wondered what he was saying, how he was justifying this. From the back seat of the cruiser, she could see her own car, door still open, her suit jacket visible on the passenger seat. Her phone was in her purse on the floor, her shoes under the dashboard. All the trappings of her life suddenly out of reach. A neighborhood kid on a bicycle had stopped to watch the scene, mouth open in shock. An elderly couple walked their dog, on the opposite sidewalk, pointedly not looking her way. This was the kind of neighborhood where people believed the police were always right, where arrests happened to those people from those areas, not here among the manicured lawns and luxury vehicles. Officer Thornton returned to her car, searching through it with methodical precision. Marissa watched him open her glove compartment, flip through her registration and insurance papers, check under seats. His frustration was visible even from a distance when he found nothing incriminating. Finally, he returned to the cruiser and slid into the driver's seat. "We're going to sort this out at the station," he said, not looking at her in the rearview mirror. "Yes, we certainly are," Marissa replied, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside her. She knew what waited at the end of this ride, the moment when they realized exactly who they had in custody. But the damage was already done. The neighbors had seen. Colleagues driving home might have passed by. The story would spread. As the cruiser pulled away from the curb, Marissa closed her eyes briefly, centering herself. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about every person who'd ever been in this position without the shield of a law degree and a prosecutor's badge to protect them. When this was over, and it would be over soon, there would be consequences. Not just for Officer James Thornton, but for a system that allowed this to happen in the first place. The patrol car turned onto the main road, heading toward the police station. Marissa kept her back straight, her expression composed. She was already preparing her opening statement in her head. The ride to the police station lasted only 15 minutes, but to Marissa, it felt like hours. Every bump in the road sent pain shooting through her shoulders, her arms awkwardly positioned behind her back in the too tight handcuffs. She focused on her breathing, on staying calm. Getting emotional now wouldn't help her case. Through the window, she watched the familiar streets of her community pass by, the grocery store where she shopped on Sundays, the coffee shop where the baristas knew her order by heart. the library where she sometimes worked on weekends when her home office felt too isolated. All these places where she existed as a respected professional, not as a suspect in the back of a police cruiser. Officer Thornton drove in silence, his posture rigid. Occasionally he glanced at her in the rearview mirror, his expression unreadable. Marissa met his eyes steadily each time, refusing to look away first. The police station came into view, a modern brick building with the department's crest displayed prominently above the entrance. Marissa had walked through those doors countless times before, badge clipped to her blazer, files tucked under her arm, respected and welcomed by the officers inside. Today would be different. Thornton parked in the restricted area behind the building, away from the public lot where visitors entered. He cut the engine and stepped out, taking his time before opening the back door. "Let's go," he said, grabbing her upper arm to guide her out of the car. "The handcuffs are unnecessary." "Officer," Marissa said, wincing as the metal dug deeper into her wrists. "I'm not a flight risk or a danger to anyone." "Standard procedure," he replied curtly, but there was something new in his voice, a hint of uncertainty perhaps. Now that they were at the station, the reality of what he'd done might be starting to sink in. They entered through the rear door, bypassing the public lobby. The familiar hallways looked different from this perspective, as someone being brought in rather than someone coming to work. A few officers glanced up as Thornton led her through, their expressions shifting from professional interest to confusion, as they recognized her face but couldn't immediately place it in this context. "Booking room," Thornton said to a uniformed officer at the desk, nodding toward an open doorway. The desk officer, a heavy-set man with salt and pepper hair, looked up from his computer. His eyes widened slightly as they landed on Marissa. "Hold on," he said, standing up. "Isn't that... Just need to process this one." Thornton cut him off, steering Marissa toward the booking room. Inside, another officer was already seated at a computer terminal, a camera set up for mugshots against the far wall. He looked up as they entered, his casual expression freezing as he recognized Marissa. "Officer Thornton," he said carefully. "What's going on here?" "Traffic violation escalated to resisting arrest," Thornton replied, his voice clipped. "Need to process her and get her printed." The booking officer, whose nameplate read Reynolds, looked from Thornton to Marissa and back again. "You want to process her?" "That's what I said," Thornton snapped. Reynolds stood up slowly. "Maybe we should call the sergeant first." "We'll call him after booking." Marissa decided it was time to speak up. "Officer Reynolds," she said, her voice clear and steady despite the circumstances. "I'm Marissa Johnson, Assistant District Attorney. I believe there's been a significant misunderstanding here." The room went silent. Reynolds' eyes widened, and even Thornton seemed to freeze in place. "Ms. Johnson," Reynolds said, recognition fully dawning on his face. "From the DA's office? The one who handled the Parkside murders last year?" "The same," she replied. "I'd shake your hand, but..." She shrugged her shoulders slightly, indicating the handcuffs. Reynolds turned to Thornton, his expression a mix of disbelief and growing alarm. "You arrested the ADA? On what charges exactly?" Thornton's face had paled visibly. She ran a stop sign and became confrontational during the traffic stop. "I requested to know why I was being asked to exit my vehicle for a minor traffic violation," Marissa corrected. "At no point did I resist or threaten Officer Thornton. I simply asked questions and informed him of my position." The door to the booking room swung open, and an older man with captain's bars on his uniform stepped in. Captain Rivera, head of the precinct and someone Marissa had worked with many times over the years. "I heard we had Ada Johnson in booking," he said, his tone carefully neutral, though his eyes were sharp with concern. "Someone want to explain why one of our most respected prosecutors is standing in my station in handcuffs?" Thornton straightened his posture. "Sir, I was unaware of her position when I initiated the stop. She failed to comply with my instructions and..." "Take those cuffs off her right now," Rivera interrupted, his voice low but carrying the unmistakable weight of authority. Thornton hesitated only a moment before producing the key and removing the handcuffs. Marissa rubbed her wrists, noting the red marks where the metal had bitten into her skin. "Ms. Johnson," Rivera said, his tone softening, "I can't begin to express how..." "Let's discuss this in your office." "Captain," she suggested, her professional demeanor firmly back in place despite her stockinged feet and the lingering pain in her shoulders. "Officer Thornton should join us." Rivera nodded, gesturing toward the door. "Of course." "Reynolds, find Ms. Johnson some shoes from Lost and Found, would you?" "No need to go to that trouble," Marissa said. "I'd just like to retrieve my belongings from my car, which I assume was towed here." Rivera shot a questioning look at Thornton, who cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Her vehicle is still at the scene, sir. I didn't arrange for a tow." "You left my car unlocked with my personal belongings inside on the side of the road?" Marissa asked, her calm facade cracking slightly. "I'll send someone to secure the vehicle immediately," Rivera said, giving Thornton a look that promised a reckoning later. "In the meantime, please come with me." As they walked through the station toward Rivera's office, Marissa was acutely aware of the stares from officers and administrative staff. Word was spreading quickly. She held her head high, refusing to show how much the situation had affected her. Rivera's office was a corner space with windows overlooking the parking lot, walls covered with commendations, photographs, and the expected law enforcement memorabilia. He closed the door behind them and gestured for Marissa to take a seat in one of the chairs facing his desk. "Officer Thornton, wait outside," he said. "I'll speak with you shortly. Sir, with all due respect, I think I should explain my side of outside." "Officer, now." Thornton's jaw tightened, but he nodded stiffly and left the room. Once the door closed, Rivera sank into his chair with a heavy sigh. "Ms. Johnson, I don't even know where to begin." "What happened out there?" Marissa recounted the incident in precise detail. The initial stop, Thornton's suspicious questioning, his demand that she exit the vehicle, and the escalation that followed. She spoke with the same measured clarity she used when presenting evidence in court, laying out facts without embellishment. When she finished, Rivera shook his head, his expression grim. This should never have happened. Not to anyone, but especially not to someone who's been a partner to this department for years. "It shouldn't happen to anyone," Marissa repeated, emphasizing his words. "That's precisely the point, Captain. Today it happened to me, someone with the knowledge and resources to address it. But how many others has it happened to who didn't have those advantages?" Rivera leaned forward, resting his elbows on his desk. "I understand your concern and it's valid. But right now I'm focused on making this right for you. What can we do? First, I'd like my property secured and returned to me. Second, I want a complete record of this incident, including Officer Thornton's dash cam and body cam footage preserved for review. Third, I'll be filing a formal complaint regarding Officer Thornton's conduct." "All reasonable requests," Rivera nodded. "And of course there won't be any charges filed against you." Marissa raised an eyebrow. "There were never any legitimate charges to file, Captain." "That's the issue at hand." A knock at the door interrupted them. Rivera called for the person to enter and a young officer appeared holding Marissa's purse, suit jacket, and shoes. "We've secured Ms. Johnson's vehicle, sir," the officer said. "It's being brought to the station now." "Thank you, Officer Chen," Rivera said. "Please give Ms. Johnson her belongings." Chen handed the items to Marissa with an apologetic smile before leaving the room. Marissa slipped her feet into her heels, instantly feeling more like herself again. She checked her phone. 3 missed calls from colleagues wondering where she'd disappeared to after court. The reality of how quickly her day had derailed hit her anew. "I'd like to speak with Officer Thornton before I leave," she said, putting on her suit jacket. Rivera looked surprised. "Are you sure that's a good idea?" "Given the circumstances, I'm sure," Marissa interrupted. "This isn't just about me filing a complaint and walking away, Captain. If there's going to be any meaningful change, it has to start with direct conversation." Rivera studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "I've always respected your approach to justice, Ms. Johnson. If that's what you want, I'll bring him in." When Officer Thornton re-entered the room, his earlier confidence had evaporated. He stood rigidly at attention, eyes fixed on a point somewhere above Rivera's head. "Officer Thornton," Marissa said, "please look at me." Reluctantly, he shifted his gaze to meet hers. "What happened today was unacceptable," she said. "Not because of who I am, but because of how you chose to escalate a minor traffic stop based on assumptions and biases rather than facts. This incident will have consequences, as it should. But what happens next depends largely on your willingness to acknowledge those biases and work to address them." Thornton's face flushed, but he remained silent. I'll be back tomorrow to file my formal statement, Marissa continued, gathering her purse. I suggest you use the time to reflect on your actions today and consider what kind of officer you want to be going forward. She turned to Rivera. Captain, thank you for your assistance. I trust you'll ensure all evidence from today's incident is preserved. You have my word, Rivera assured her. Marissa nodded, then walked out of the office with her head held high, leaving both men in silence behind her. As she made her way through the station toward the exit, she felt the weight of eyes following her, some apologetic, some curious, some concerned. Outside, the evening air had cooled, and the first stars were appearing in the darkening sky. Her car had just arrived, driven by an officer who handed her the keys with a respectful nod. As Marissa slid into the driver's seat, she allowed herself finally to feel the full impact of what had happened. The humiliation, the anger, the fear, and underneath it all, a steely determination this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. By morning, the story had spread through the police department like wildfire. Officers gathered in small clusters, voices lowered, discussing what had happened. Some defended Thornton, citing the pressures of the job and split-second decisions. Others shook their heads in disgust, aware of the damage done not just to one woman but to community trust as a whole. Thornton arrived at the station to find a message waiting for him. Report to Captain Rivera's office immediately. His stomach twisted into knots as he walked the same hallway where he'd paraded the assistant district attorney in handcuffs less than 24 hours ago. Rivera wasn't alone. A stern-faced woman from Internal Affairs sat beside his desk, a folder open in front of her. Officer Thornton, Rivera said, gesturing to the empty chair. This is Lieutenant Patricia Wong from Internal Affairs. She'll be heading the investigation into yesterday's incident. Thornton lowered himself into the chair, his uniform suddenly feeling too tight around the collar. Investigation? Sir, I've already prepared my incident report explaining. You've been placed on administrative leave, effective immediately, Rivera interrupted. Badge and gun, please. The words hit Thornton like a physical blow. Administrative leave? For a traffic stop that got complicated. Lieutenant Wong looked up from her folder. For an unlawful arrest of a state prosecutor based on what appears to be racial profiling, Officer Thornton. Let's be precise about what we're discussing. Thornton's face flushed. I didn't know who she was when I pulled her over. That's precisely the problem, Wong replied. You didn't know who she was, yet you escalated a minor traffic violation into an arrest without probable cause. The question we're investigating is why. You'll continue to receive pay during the investigation, Rivera added, his tone making it clear this was a concession rather than a kindness. But you are not to enter this station except for official interviews with Internal Affairs. We'll need your badge and service weapon before you leave today. Across town at the district attorney's office, Marissa stepped off the elevator to find an unusual silence fall over the normally bustling workspace. Her colleagues stared, then quickly looked away, uncertain how to address what they'd heard. She'd called her immediate supervisor last night to explain her absence from the afternoon meeting, giving him a concise account of what had happened. By morning, everyone knew. She walked to her office, back straight, expression neutral. She'd chosen her clothes carefully today, a crisp charcoal suit, her most professional armor. The bruises on her wrists were hidden beneath her sleeves, though the memory of the handcuffs' bite remained fresh. Her assistant, Thomas, met her at her office door, his face a mix of outrage and concern. Ms. Johnson, I've rearranged your schedule as requested. The police chief called twice already, and there's a reporter from the Herald asking for comment. No comment to the press at this point, Marissa replied, setting her briefcase on her desk. And tell the chief I'll call him after I've filed my official statement at the station this morning. Thomas hesitated. There's something else. District Attorney Powell wants to see you. He said it's urgent. Marissa nodded, unsurprised. Powell had been her mentor when she first joined the office, and now as DA he was protective of his team. I'll head up now. The district attorney's corner office offered views of both the courthouse and the city beyond. Powell, a man in his early 60s with a reputation for fairness and political savvy, stood as she entered. Marissa, he said, coming around his desk to greet her. I'm so sorry about what happened. Are you all right? I'm fine, sir, she replied, taking the offered seat across from his desk. Angry but unharmed. Powell returned to his chair, studying her with concern. I've spoken with Chief Williams. He assures me this officer has been placed on leave pending a full investigation. The department is prepared to issue a formal apology, and they're hoping you won't pursue legal action. Marissa raised an eyebrow. They're worried about a lawsuit? Of course they are, Powell said. What happened to you was textbook misconduct. You could own that department if you wanted to. That's not what I want. What do you want then? Marissa leaned forward slightly. Change, real meaningful change. Not just punishment for one officer, but a hard look at the patterns that made him think his actions were acceptable. Powell nodded slowly. I thought you might say that. What are you thinking? I want to see Officer Thornton's complete record. Every stop, every arrest, every complaint. I want to know if there's a pattern of discriminatory behavior, and I want the same data for the entire department. Anonymized, of course. Stops and arrests broken down by race, neighborhood, time of day. That's a big ask, Powell said. The department won't be eager to hand over that kind of information, even to us. They will if the alternative is a high-profile civil rights lawsuit from a prosecutor who knows exactly how to make it hurt. Marissa replied, her voice steady. I'd rather work with them than against them, but I'm prepared to do either. Powell studied her for a long moment, then smiled slightly. This is why you're my best prosecutor, Marissa. You never lose sight of the bigger picture. He reached for his phone. I'll set up a meeting with Chief Williams for this afternoon. We'll start there. After leaving Powell's office, Marissa made her way to the police station to file her formal statement. The atmosphere was noticeably different today. Officers nodded respectfully as she passed, some offering quiet apologies for what had happened. Lieutenant Wong from Internal Affairs met her in an interview room. Recording device ready. Ms. Johnson, thank you for coming in, Wong said. I know reliving this experience isn't easy. It's necessary, Marissa replied simply. For the next hour, she provided a detailed account of the incident, answering Wong's questions with the precision of someone who understood exactly how important each word would be in the official record. One last question, Wong said as they concluded. You have the right to pursue criminal charges against Officer Thornton for false arrest and civil rights violations. Do you intend to do so? Marissa considered the question carefully. Not at this time. I believe there's an opportunity here for more meaningful reform than would come from prosecuting one officer, but I reserve the right to reconsider based on the findings of your investigation and the department's response. Wong nodded, turning off the recorder. Off the record? I think that's the right call. Charging Thornton would make him a scapegoat without addressing the bigger issues. Exactly, Marissa agreed. And it would polarize the department at a time when we need cooperation, not defensiveness. As she gathered her belongings to leave, Wong added, You should know, we've already begun reviewing Officer Thornton's arrest record for the past 3 years. Preliminary findings show some concerning patterns. I expected as much, Marissa said. How significant? Black drivers were 4 times more likely to be asked to exit their vehicles during his traffic stops than white drivers. Searches were conducted in 67% of stops involving minorities, compared to 12% for white drivers. Marissa absorbed this information, her suspicions confirmed. I'd like to see the complete report when it's finished. You will, Wong promised. This incident has opened a door that was kept firmly shut for a long time. A lot of people are suddenly very interested in data that was previously ignored. Later that afternoon, Marissa and District Attorney Powell sat across from Police Chief Williams in his office. The tension in the room was palpable as Williams, a career officer with political ambitions, attempted to navigate the delicate situation. Ms. Johnson, first let me express my deepest apologies for what occurred, he began. Officer Thornton's actions do not reflect the values or training of our department. With all due respect, Chief Williams, Marissa replied, I think the data may suggest otherwise. Lieutenant Wong has already shared some preliminary findings from her review of Officer Thornton's record. Williams shifted uncomfortably. One officer's actions don't define an entire department. Perhaps not, Powell interjected, but they can certainly indicate systemic problems that need addressing. That's why we're here. Marissa placed a folder on the desk between them. This is a proposal for a joint task force between our office and your department. We want to conduct a comprehensive review of arrest patterns, use of force incidents, and complaint histories. The goal isn't to point fingers, but to identify problem areas and implement better training and accountability measures. Williams picked up the folder, skepticism written across his face. This kind of review would be unprecedented. So is having your officers arrest the assistant DA who regularly works with your department. Powell pointed out dryly. We're offering you a chance to be part of the solution, Chief, Marissa added. To turn a negative incident into an opportunity for real improvement. The alternative is a very public legal battle that neither of us wants. Williams was quiet for a long moment, weighing his options. Finally, he sighed. I'll need to discuss this with the mayor and city council. Of course, Marissa nodded. But I should mention that the dash cam and body cam footage from my arrest becomes public record in 3 days unless sealed by court order. I imagine the mayor would prefer to announce a progressive joint initiative before that happens, rather than after the video is playing on every news channel in the state. The chief's eyes narrowed slightly, recognizing the gentle but unmistakable pressure being applied. I'll have an answer for you by tomorrow morning. As Marissa and Powell left the police headquarters, the sun was setting over the city, casting long shadows across the steps. He'll agree, Powell said confidently. He's smart enough to know this is his best option. I hope so, Marissa replied, looking out across the city she'd sworn to serve and protect through the law. Because this isn't just about what happened to me. It's about making sure it doesn't happen to anyone else. Powell nodded, understanding the weight of her words. What you're doing takes courage, Marissa. Not everyone would use their position this way. What's the point of having power if you don't use it to fix what's broken? She asked simply. As they walked to their cars, Marissa knew the hardest work was still ahead. Not just changing policies, but changing minds. It wouldn't be easy and it wouldn't be quick. But for the first time since those handcuffs had closed around her wrists, she felt something like hope. True to Powell's prediction, Chief Williams called the next morning with his answer. The police department would cooperate with the joint task force. The mayor, concerned about both public perception and the real issues at stake, had given his full support. The announcement was carefully crafted and released to the press by noon, a collaborative effort between law enforcement and the district attorney's office to review policies and implement reforms where needed. The dash cam and body cam footage remained sealed, a concession Marissa had granted in exchange for full access to departmental records. She knew the power of that video and held it as leverage, but also recognized that publicly humiliating the department wouldn't foster the cooperation she needed. Within a week, the task force was assembled. 3 senior prosecutors from Marissa's office, 3 high-ranking officers selected by Chief Williams, and 2 civilian oversight representatives from the community. Marissa insisted on leading the prosecutor side herself, despite Powell's concern about her personal connection to the case. That's exactly why it needs to be me, she'd told him. I'm not just a prosecutor looking at abstract data. I've lived it. That perspective matters. Their first meeting took place in a conference room at City Hall, neutral territory. The tension around the table was thick as Marissa laid out their objectives. We're here to examine patterns, not individual cases, she explained. We need to understand where the system is failing and how to fix it. This isn't about pointing fingers or assigning blame. Captain Rivera, one of the police representatives, spoke up. Some officers are concerned this is just a witch hunt sparked by one unfortunate incident. It wasn't unfortunate, Captain, it was illegal, Marissa corrected firmly. And if it happened to me, someone with resources and connections, how many times has it happened to people who couldn't fight back? That's what we're here to find out. The data told a disturbing story. Black and Latino drivers were stopped at rates far exceeding their percentage of the population. Searches were conducted disproportionately, even though contraband was found less often than in vehicles driven by white residents. Use of force incidents showed similar disparities. These numbers aren't unique to our department, one of the police lieutenants pointed out defensively. You'll find similar patterns nationwide. That doesn't make them acceptable, Marissa countered. It makes the need for change even more urgent. As the task force dug deeper, they identified key issues: inadequate training on implicit bias, a lack of clear guidelines for escalation during stops, and a complaint system that rarely resulted in meaningful discipline. Each finding became the foundation for a specific recommendation. Meanwhile, Officer Thornton remained on administrative leave, the weight of the investigation hanging over him. The isolation from his colleagues and the public scrutiny had forced him into an uncomfortable period of reflection. His initial defensiveness, the insistence that he was just doing his job, that Marissa had been uncooperative, slowly gave way to uncomfortable questions about his own actions and assumptions. He found himself replaying not just the incident with Marissa, but countless other stops throughout his career. Had he approached white drivers with the same suspicion? Had he been as quick to escalate those situations? The honest answers troubled him deeply. 3 weeks into his leave, Thornton requested a meeting with Lieutenant Wong from Internal Affairs. To her surprise, he arrived without a union representative. "I've been reviewing my own conduct," he began hesitantly, "and I think I need to acknowledge some things." Wong studied him carefully. "Go on." "When I pulled over Miss Johnson, I made assumptions based on how she looked and where she was. I convinced myself it was just good police work, trusting my instincts. But looking back at the video, at my own words and actions," he paused, struggling, "I was wrong. And it wasn't the first time." "That's a significant admission, Officer Thornton," Wong said. "I'm not saying this to save my job," he continued. "I don't know if I should even keep it. But I do know that pretending there isn't a problem won't fix anything." The conversation lasted nearly 2 hours, with Thornton providing specific examples of times he'd treated minority drivers differently, often without conscious awareness until now. Wong recorded everything, recognizing that this unexpected testimony could be valuable to the task force's work. The next day, Thornton made another request. He wanted to meet with Marissa Johnson. When Marissa received the request, her initial reaction was refusal. What could possibly be gained from such a meeting? But after consideration, she agreed. With conditions, the meeting would take place at her office with Powell present and would be recorded. Thornton arrived in civilian clothes, looking markedly different from the arrogant officer who had arrested her. The confidence was gone, replaced with a nervous humility that seemed genuine. "Ms. Johnson, thank you for agreeing to see me," he began. "I know you have no reason to listen to anything I have to say." "I'm listening, Officer Thornton," she replied neutrally. "That's why we're here." He took a deep breath. "I came to apologize, not because my superiors told me to, or to try to save my job, but because I was wrong. What I did to you was wrong. The way I approached you, the assumptions I made, the way I escalated the situation, all of it was wrong." Marissa watched him carefully, saying nothing. "I've been going through my own records," Thornton continued, "looking at my stops, my arrests. The patterns they're obvious once you actually look for them. I never thought of myself as someone who would profile people, but the evidence says otherwise." "Self-awareness is a start," Marissa said. "But what matters now is what you do with it." "I want to be part of fixing the problem," he said. "I don't know what that looks like. Maybe I don't deserve to wear the badge anymore. But whether I'm an officer or not, I want to help make things better." "Why should I believe you?" Marissa asked. "How do I know this isn't just an attempt to save your career?" "You don't," Thornton admitted. "I can't prove my sincerity except through actions over time. But I'm willing to do whatever it takes to show I mean what I'm saying." The conversation continued for nearly an hour. Difficult, but productive. By the end, no promises had been made on either side, but something important had shifted. What had begun as an adversarial relationship had the potential to become something unexpected, a partnership for change. 2 months after the incident, the task force presented its findings and recommendations to the city council in a public session. The room was packed with community members, police officers, and reporters. Marissa stood at the podium, flanked by representatives from both the DA's office and the police department. The unified front they presented was itself a powerful statement. "Our investigation identified several areas where current policies and practices have contributed to inequitable outcomes in our criminal justice system," she began. "Today we're presenting not just our findings, but concrete steps to address these issues." The recommendations were comprehensive: mandatory training on implicit bias for all officers, body cameras to be worn and activated during all interactions with the public, a civilian review board with real authority to investigate complaints, revised guidelines for traffic stops and searches, and community engagement initiatives to rebuild trust. "These changes won't happen overnight," Marissa acknowledged. "Real transformation takes time, commitment, and ongoing evaluation. But the work begins today. Chief Williams stepped forward to announce that the department had already begun implementing several of the recommendations, including the expanded training program. To the surprise of many, he introduced the officer who would be assisting with that training, James Thornton. Murmurs rippled through the audience as Thornton approached the microphone. He looked nervous but determined. 6 months ago, I made a terrible mistake, he began. I abused my authority and violated the rights of a citizen I was sworn to protect. That incident forced me to confront uncomfortable truths about my own biases and conduct as an officer. He paused, glancing at Marissa before continuing. I can't undo what I did, but I can use my experience to help other officers recognize and address their own blind spots. This new training program isn't about shaming officers or making them defensive. It's about giving them tools to do their jobs better, more fairly, and with greater awareness. The press conference generated headlines across the state, with opinion pieces ranging from skeptical to cautiously optimistic. Some community activists criticized the reforms as not going far enough, while police union representatives worried they went too far. But the conversation had changed. No longer was the question whether bias existed in policing, but how best to address it. For Marissa, watching Thornton speak about his journey from denial to awareness was a powerful moment. She harbored no illusions that one reformed officer or one set of policy changes would solve the deep-seated problems in the criminal justice system, but it was a start. After the press conference, as the crowd dispersed, Thornton approached her. Was that okay? He asked. I wasn't sure how much to say about, It was honest, she replied. That's what matters. The real test comes in the months ahead, seeing if these changes actually stick. They will, he said with unexpected conviction. At least I'm going to do everything I can to make sure they do. Marissa nodded, cautiously hopeful despite herself. So will I, Officer Thornton. So will I. As they walked away in opposite directions, Marissa back to her office to prepare for an upcoming trial, Thornton to meet with the training division. Both carried the weight of what had happened and what was yet to come. The incident that had brought them together under the worst circumstances had sparked something neither could have predicted, a chance for meaningful change in a system that desperately needed it. The work was just beginning. 6 months later, the community center on the east side of town was packed to capacity. Residents from all neighborhoods filled the seats with more standing along the walls. At the front of the room, a table had been set up with microphones for the panel members, representatives from the police department, the district attorney's office, and local community organizations. Marissa Johnson sat at the center of the panel, reviewing her notes one last time. Beside her, Officer Thornton, now Sergeant Thornton, recently promoted to lead the department's new community relations unit, looked out at the crowd with a mix of nervousness and determination. Quite a turnout, he murmured. People care about what's happening in their community, Marissa replied. That's a good thing, even if some of them came to voice frustrations. District Attorney Powell approached, leaning down between them. Chief Williams just arrived. We're ready to begin. The community forum had been Marissa's idea, a chance to report on the changes implemented over the past 6 months and to hear directly from residents about their experiences. It was one thing to announce reforms, quite another to ensure they were making a real difference in people's lives. Powell stepped up to the microphone to introduce the panel and explain the purpose of the meeting. As he spoke, Marissa scanned the audience. The diversity of the crowd was encouraging. People of all backgrounds had come to participate, not just those who had historically felt targeted by police. 6 months ago, Powell was saying, an incident occurred that forced our community to confront uncomfortable truths about our criminal justice system. Today, we want to share what's changed since then and, more importantly, listen to your perspectives on whether those changes are making a difference. He introduced each panel member, ending with Marissa and Thornton. The partnership between these two individuals symbolizes what we're trying to achieve in our community, a justice system where accountability leads to growth and collaboration replaces confrontation. As Marissa stood to speak, she felt the weight of expectation in the room. Some people wanted to hear about dramatic transformations. Others were skeptical that anything had really changed. Both perspectives were valid. 6 months ago, I was wrongfully arrested during a routine traffic stop. She began, her voice steady. What could have been just another disturbing incident instead became a catalyst for examining larger patterns and problems within our system. She outlined the concrete changes that had been implemented. All officers had completed the new bias training program. Body cameras were now mandatory and activated during all public interactions. The Civilian Review Board was in place and had already handled 27 complaints, with transparent results published online. And traffic stop data was being collected and analyzed monthly to identify potential disparities. These are meaningful steps, she acknowledged, but they're just the beginning of a longer journey. Real change isn't measured in policies or training sessions. It's measured in daily interactions between officers and citizens, in trust rebuilt over time, in people feeling truly protected and served by those sworn to do so. When it was Thornton's turn to speak, he stood without notes, his posture reflecting a new kind of confidence, not the defensive arrogance he'd once displayed, but something more grounded. "Many of you know me as the officer involved in Ms. Johnson's arrest," he began. "What you might not know is how that moment changed my life and my understanding of what it means to wear this badge." He spoke candidly about his journey. Over the past months, the painful process of confronting his own biases, the resistance he'd initially faced from fellow officers when he became involved in the reform efforts, and the gradual shifts in attitude he'd witnessed in the department. "I won't pretend it's been easy or that everyone has embraced these changes," he admitted. "Change is hard, especially when it requires examining beliefs and behaviors we've never questioned before. But what I've learned from my own experience is that growth begins with honesty, being willing to look at uncomfortable truths and take responsibility for them." After the panel, presentations came the heart of the meeting, community questions and comments. A microphone was set up in the center aisle, and people lined up to speak. The first speaker was an elderly black man who had lived in the community for over 50 years. "I appreciate all these fancy new policies," he said, his voice carrying decades of skepticism. "But what happens the next time one of your officers decides the rules don't apply to them? Who's holding them accountable when the cameras aren't rolling?" Chief Williams addressed the question, explaining the expanded role of the Civilian Review Board and the new disciplinary measures in place. The exchange was respectful but pointed, reflecting the community's wariness about promises they'd heard before. A middle-aged white woman approached the microphone next. "My son was pulled over last month," she said. The officer was professional, explained exactly why he'd been stopped, and asked permission before searching the car. "That might sound basic, but it's not what we've experienced in the past. Something is different." As the evening progressed, more people shared their stories, some positive, others describing continued problems that made it clear the work was far from complete. The panel listened attentively to each speaker, taking notes and responding with specific plans rather than vague reassurances. One of the most powerful moments came when a young black man in his 20s approached the microphone. He addressed Thornton directly. "I was stopped by you 2 years ago," he said. "You pulled me out of my car, handcuffed me on the curb while my neighbors watched, and searched my vehicle without consent. You found nothing, but you kept me there for 45 minutes. I filed a complaint that went nowhere." The room fell silent. Thornton nodded slowly, the pain of recognition clear on his face. "I remember," he said quietly, "and I'm deeply sorry for how I treated you. There's no excuse for it. You deserved better from me and from the department. Your complaint should have been taken seriously." "I don't want your apology," the young man replied. "I want to know what you're doing to make sure other officers aren't doing the same thing right now." It was Marissa who answered. "That's exactly why we've implemented the new accountability measures. Every complaint is now reviewed by civilians as well as officers. Body camera footage is preserved and examined, and officers with patterns of concerning behavior face real consequences, not just a note in their file." She looked at the young man directly. "But you're right to be skeptical. Systems don't change overnight, and policies are only as good as their implementation. That's why we need people like you at these meetings, holding us accountable and reminding us how much work remains to be done." The forum continued for over 3 hours, with more than 40 community members speaking. By the end, the panel had a list of specific concerns to address and suggestions to consider. As people began to file out, Thornton found himself approached by a group of young officers who had attended the meeting in civilian clothes. They had questions about the training program, about how to handle resistance from older colleagues, about navigating the changes within the department. "It's not easy," he told them honestly. "You'll make mistakes. I still do. The difference is being willing to acknowledge them and learn from them." Across the room, Marissa was speaking with community organizers who had initially been among the strongest critics of the police department. Their conversation was animated but constructive, discussing next steps, additional reforms, ways to ensure the momentum wasn't lost. Powell joined her as the organizers departed. "Quite a different scene than 6 months ago," he observed. "There's still tension, but it feels productive now." "It is," Marissa agreed. "People are talking with each other instead of at each other. That's progress." As the community center emptied, Marissa and Thornton found themselves walking to the parking lot at the same time. "Thank you for being honest tonight," she said. "It matters that you didn't try to minimize what happened or make excuses." "I've had enough of excuses," he replied, "including the ones I used to make to myself." He hesitated, then added, "We're making a difference, aren't we?" "This isn't just for show?" Marissa considered the question seriously. "The data shows improvement. Complaints are down 30%. Use of force incidents have decreased. More officers are engaging positively with the communities they serve." "But," Thornton prompted, hearing the unspoken qualification in her tone. "But systems have inertia," she said. "They resist change. What we've done these past 6 months is important, but it's the next 6 months, the next 6 years that will determine whether these changes become permanent or fade away when attention moves elsewhere." Thornton nodded slowly. "Then we keep going. Keep pushing. Keep holding ourselves and each other accountable." "Exactly," Marissa agreed. As they reached their cars, a light rain began to fall, the drops catching the glow of the parking lot lamps. It had been exactly 6 months since that traffic stop had changed both their lives and, in small but significant ways, their community. There was still so much work to do. Trust once broken took a long time to rebuild. Biases once formed didn't disappear after a single training session. Systems designed to resist change required constant pressure to evolve. But standing there in the gentle rain, Marissa felt something she hadn't expected to feel 6 months ago. Hope. Not naive optimism that everything was fixed, but a grounded hope born from witnessing real effort and genuine change, however imperfect. "Same time next month?" she asked, referring to the next community forum they'd scheduled. "I'll be there," Thornton promised. "We've only just begun." As they drove away in opposite directions, the rain washing clean the streets between them, both carried the knowledge that what had started as a moment of injustice had grown into something neither could have imagined. A chance to remake a small corner of a deeply flawed system into something better. More just, more human. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough until every person, regardless of skin color or background, could drive through their community without fear. But it was a start. And sometimes a start was enough to change everything that followed.